let's finish this up. We're on the bottom of page 787, Layout Managers. Just so you know, this chapter, this book, discusses 3 layout managers. All right, in particular, it talks about, what is it, the flow layout, the grid layout, and the border layout. All right, but there are more layouts than that. There's what's called a bag layout, there's a grid bag layout, there's actually a layout that's called no layout, and you can also buy third-party layouts. There are companies that will set those things up for you. All right, but this chapter just talks about those 3. So as you can see right there, the layout manager governs the positions and sizes of components in a container. It's how you lay things out, all right, in the container, hence the name, all right? Notice, in order to use a layout manager with a group of components, you must place the components in the container and create the layout manager object. So if you want to use a flow layout, you have to create a flow layout manager object, a border layout, layout manager object, and a grid layout manager object. Real quickly again, that's the default manager, or the default one is the flow, which just says keep going from left to right, you know, in a row. When you run out, start a new row. That's all it means. All right. The border is what we had on the board here with the north, south, east, west, and center. And the grid layout is just imagine it kind of makes it into a spreadsheet. But every row every column and every row is the same size. It's always the size of the biggest component. Everything resizes itself accordingly. So notice what we have here. JPanel, panel equals new JPanel, panel.set layout, new border layout. That's what you've got to do. All right, it's going to be very important that when you're doing this next assignment, all right, not now, I'm not giving you one for 12, I'm waiting until we get done with 13, then you can do it either way, but it's important for the code you do have to write to have your book handy. All right, unless you really like Googling a lot. So the flow, as we mentioned, arranges components in rows. The rules, you can add multiple components. When you add them, they appear horizontally from left to right, and when you run out of room, you start a new row. Kind of what I just told you. All right, and again, that's what we used for the one of the earlier ones. I don't remember what it was. These programs aren't hard. There's not a lot of new stuff in here, except for what you see on line 30 there. Set layout, new flow layout. In its own way, when you create things using a layout manager, and this is going to sound stupid, but look at this. In its own way, this is responsive. Like we talk about responsive web pages, because if you make your component area narrow enough, they're just going to stack one on top of the other. If you make it wide enough, they're just going to all be in the same row. See what I'm saying? And other than that, it's going to be based on the width of the container. You can make things automatically flow to the left. Notice there's a flow layout.left. There's also a flow layout.right, and there's a flow layout.center. Why would you want to use those? There's left align, right align, and center align. Remember, it's possible that you can be in your center area right here, and if you wanted to, you could take that area and you could set that thing up so that it was running under a border layout or a flow layout. All right, or a grid layout or any other layout. Yes, but the way the question was, could you mix the layouts so where you had one way on the left and one way on the right? You'd actually do that probably with 2 different layout managers. All right, and actually how I do that is I would use 2 of them, and I'd have each button in its own layout manager, and I'd have one left align and one right align. There's not that much more coding to do, and then it naturally would look that way. You're going to see some goofy examples in here, but they're showing them to you for effect. I mean, I don't know why you'd ever do this, but you could. A lot of it looks very, very typeface like when you're in Word and you left align, right align, or just center align something. It's the same kind of thing. The border layout again, better picture I guess than mine up on the board, but north, south, west, east, and center region. And again, as we mentioned, the center region is greedy. So if you leave any of those out, so if I leave out the north, just imagine that the the west then goes up to the top here, the east goes up to the top here, but since the north is gone, the center grabs everything else that's in here. So when you set this up and you set up a new border layout, then you have to figure out, Kelly, again, to kind of go back to what you talked about. I can have one panel, literally what I have here right now are 5 panels. And each one of those panels, if I wanted to, I could have one of them could be a grid layout, the next one could be a flow layout, then I could have another grid layout, then I could have another border layout in here, etc. So you can get as nutso with this stuff as you want to. So notice again, created a new panel, created the new border layout, then we start adding the components. So they've got another example here. This, like I said, some of this stuff is going to look a little goofy, but I think the author is doing it for effect. So notice he's got a north button, a south button, an east button, a west button, and a center button. Okay? One for each region. Well, look at how it looks. By default, they fill up their entire regions. All right? What if I don't want that? Well, we're going to get to that in just a minute, but that's what it looks like. And that's just with buttons. That's just with a single button. So what if I wanted 2 buttons in here? You know, again, I can put 2 buttons in there, but, you know, it's like imagine that was cut in half type of thing. So again, the rules, the component placed in the north and south may be resized horizontally. All right. If it's in east and west, it may be resized vertically. So horizontal versus vertical, all right. And the component in the center may be resized both ways. So you'd say, well, why would you want to do this? Well, maybe, you know, again, they're showing buttons, but this could be anything that you wanted it to be here. Right. Notice there's all sorts of stuff, because this is, you know, we could go off on this. I don't see the reason to do so. But notice there's gaps that you can put in there, which is kind of like putting in gutter space that we talked about the other day in the Joomla class. So if I wanted to put a little bit of white space around them, you could do that. This is what I mentioned though, the nesting panels inside of a container's region. So notice what they have. Look at that first picture. If you put 5 buttons and you size them, you know, by default, I shouldn't say that, but if you just put 5 regular size buttons in and you want them to look like that, all right? So it says 5 JPanel buttons are created and a JButton object is added to each one. Well, again, you already saw what happens when you put them in here. They take up everything because they're all greedy. All right. So what you do is you stick them in panels, which again, our panels are invisible containers which are inside of frames, which are also invisible containers. All right. And they show that when you get done. Okay. And it may not look like much, but what they're trying to show is now you have some control over the size of these. The grid layout is a fairly simple one. Again, as I mentioned, it kind of looks like a spreadsheet. So if this would be what? This would have 15 cells, so it's what? 3 rows and 5 columns. 3 by 5. And regardless, I can leave every one of these empty, but in the middle one here I can put my name. And however long that, or however wide that name is, then the other 14 will become the exact same width and height. They have to be uniform in size. That's why you typically use grid layout. When you do this, the grids don't show. But if you set them up like this, typically, again, it's because you want things to line up like little soldiers. Right. So again, the rules for these, as it says here, each cell can hold only one component. All cells are the same size. A component placed in a cell automatically resizes to take up any extra space. So here would be an example of what? 2 by 3, 2 rows by 3 columns. So they show you an example of that one. It's the same program, they just keep writing it. All right, and you notice that they're all the same size. Again, when you start working with panels, you've got some more control, so you can make them look like that. All right, that jumps us up here to page 804, where they are talking about checkboxes and radio buttons. The good news here is there's not really anything new. This is the same way that we've done checkboxes and radio buttons in other languages. This is really pretty kind of the same way you do them in HTML. All right. Radio buttons, mutually exclusive choices. All right. So as it says, that's what it says. Now a couple things about this. If you say JRadio button and you put in there the text and you put in there true, that means that one is automatically selected by default. It's not checked, it's not selected, it's the word true. Okay? If you wanted to do that. So for this one right here, they've got JRadio button control equals new JRadio button, choice 1 true. That made this one. Does that make sense? And when you create a radio button, they haven't shown it yet, but when you create a radio button, since you want them to be mutually exclusive, you put radio buttons by default into a radio button group. All right, and that's what they're going to get to in just a couple minutes. So they say you can do this, and you can just throw them in there, but again, you want to put the group in there, and then you add them, you end up adding them to the group, group.add. The system has to have some way of knowing, because you could have random radio buttons on a page, and they may not be related to one another at all. Okay? If you've got a radio button that's just out there and it's either clicked or unclicked, chances are you don't need a radio button. You probably would be better off with a checkbox. Typically, if you're going to use radio buttons, there's really no reason to have radio buttons unless you have at least 2 of them. And one can be true and one can be false. All right. Now, here's where it changes a little bit. So now they want to be able to convert. Instead of going from kilometers to miles, you could go from kilometers to miles or to feet or to inches. The math isn't important. What's important is, coming down to here, notice, like a button, radio buttons, hence the name, also implement action listener. Okay? So you can use, again, get source or get action command, just like we just looked at. All right? So you see an example, they've run it and they put in 2 and they click the miles button, then they'd run it again and click the feet button, then they run it again and click the inches button. All right? How do you determine whether or not a button has been clicked? There it is. That's it. If radio dot is selected. That's it. All right? And where it's got radio is selected, be the name of the radio button. Now, see this? What you're going to find is there are some of these GUI controls that if you put if you put the name of the control .doClick, you are manually forcing it to be clicked. So if you had a reason to force that to happen, you know, maybe if the user doesn't make a selection in 10 seconds, you make one for them, type of an idea. They're on a countdown. Okay. Checkboxes, as it says, you know what those are, but notice how these will change. There's the is selected. That's the same stuff we saw before. But it's item listener instead of action listener. And instead of action performed, it's item state changed. Okay, so different controls have different action listeners associated with them. So we've seen 3 controls. 2 of the controls, the buttons and the radio buttons, both implemented the action listener, both needed the action performed method, and both could use either, all right, the action command, or the get action command, or the get source. Now, with checkboxes, it implements the item listener, and it must have an item state changed. And I believe this will also take either the get source or the get action command. I don't know if he shows them both in here or not. All right. So here's the same program that he showed before, but instead of having buttons, he put in checkboxes. If you click the yellow one, the background turns yellow. If you click the red one, the background turns red. All right. That's why I'm not going over the code, because it's the same code we saw in previous programs. Again, you can force it to happen with the name of the checkbox .doClick. for whatever reason, again, good, bad, indifferent, it doesn't really matter, but I'm on page 815, and we're talking about borders. All right. To me, Java kind of goes a little overboard with borders. In fact, they literally have a class that you use to create borders that's called Border Factory. Borders are what you think they are. All right, so as a component can appear with several different styles of borders around it. The border object specifies the details of the borders. You use a border factory to create border objects. All right, here's some of the ones that you can use. Very similar again to when you're creating borders in HTML. You can have dash borders, dotted borders, solid borders, etc. So there's a lot of different ones here that you can use. I will tell you, that, again, this isn't meant to be funny or anything else. It's not funny. But when you were doing the homework for Chapter 11, I don't care how generic it is. You can go nuts with colors. You can go nuts with the different layouts and stuff if you want to. But I'm more concerned with you writing the code that works than I am with you playing with aesthetics. You know, I've said this before. Give me a butt-ugly interface that works over the world's most beautiful interface that doesn't work. All right. You can also have an empty border, as it says in there. Line borders, title borders. There's all sorts of different ones. All right. So the end of the chapter, and this is it, but I just want to go through this. It's about 10, 15 pages. I don't know. But I'd like to go through it with you. It's Brandy's Bagels. I think that, yeah. And if you run through this, this is what I'll tell you. If you read through this, or if you've been listening today and you're confused, I would actually key in this exercise. I think it would help a lot. It's not short, but if you've got time, you could probably do it in like an afternoon or whatever. So, it's a very simple place. Brandy's Bagel Place sells bagels. Two kinds, white bagels and whole wheat bagels. And on any bagel, you can have no toppings or any combination of cream cheese, butter, peach jelly, and blueberry jam. All right? Also, if you want, you can buy 3 types of coffee, regular, decaf, and cappuccino. This is what you build. And it's a great example because what you notice is they're going to use border layout in here. All right, they're also, so that the whole thing is going to be in a border layout. Then they're going to, in here, they end up using grid layouts in here to line it up. And believe it or not, this is not even as part of a border. All right, but you also have radio buttons and you've got checkboxes. And the way the author creates this is, notice there's a greetings panel. And all that says is, welcome to Brandy's Bagel. That's built as a separate Java class. All right. Then there's a bagel panel. That's this. Then there's a topping panel. That's this. Then there's a coffee panel, which is this. So it really shows you how you can break stuff out into its own little area or areas. I think it's a really good example. All right. So again, the greeting, and they're shorter that way too. All right, so in the greetings panel, you put a label in there, and in that label it just says, welcome to Brandy's Bagel House. That's the whole thing, 23 lines. And that includes putting some Java doc comments in there, your import statement, and your curlies. So probably about 15 or so lines of code. That's all. All right. And that's what it does, is this. Then they do the bagel panel. Now think about what you have to do with the bagel panel. You had 2 different kinds of bagels. It sure is, to me at least, it sure makes sense to put those in there as constants because as time goes on, the price of those bagels will change. All right. So we've got a radio button. Do you want a white bagel? Do you want a wheat bagel? Okay. Now, I could be wrong on this, but I'm just going to back up for a second. I think the way this is actually set up, I think that one of them they said is selected. I could be wrong, but you know, it would make no sense. It would make no sense that you would be able to just choose cream cheese, butter, peach jelly, and jam and not have a bagel. All right. I mean, you could make the case and say, well, if they sell them in little pouches, maybe you wanted them for lunch or something. I guess that sort of makes sense. All right. But that's the kind of choice you have to make. Again, this isn't a great application because right now you can only buy one. You can't buy multiple bagels. You have to buy them one at a time. But it's, I mean, this is meant to be a teaching tool rather than something you'd actually use. All right. So notice what we're doing in here. Get bagel cost. All right. Well, it's got to be one or the other. So if the white bagel is selected, all right, then the cost is white bagel. Otherwise, it's wheat bagel. Since there was only one line, the author didn't even take the time to put them in curlies. Again, the white bagel is automatically selected when you create this. It's the default choice. All right, the class does not have an event listener because we do not want to execute any code when you select a bagel. You're not going to run any code until you click the button. And there's the toppings panel. Again, very similar, but the difference is a lot of people eat plain bagels and they put no toppings on them. So when you think about it, there's what? There's 4 times 3 times 2 times 1 plus 1 possibility. All right, there's 4 possibilities here, times 3, which is 12, times 2, which is 24, times 1, which is still 24, and none. So there's 25 different combinations you could actually go with in here. All right. So they do the same thing. They create the constants. They create checkboxes, and this time instead of radio buttons. And again, since they're checkboxes, we're going to have to implement the item listener. All right. But notice in this, I'm asking you this, and you should know this because we talked about this with other programs. Can somebody tell me, who's in this class, can somebody tell me, why did they do it like that? Why is it not if else? If you made those all if else, else, you can only choose one of them. I don't want that. I want to give you the opportunity to choose 1 or to choose 2 or to choose 3 or to choose 4. Not only that, I have no idea in what order you're going to select those. If you select all 4, that's why it's plus equals for all of them. All right. And that gives you this. Then we've got the coffee panel, and the coffee panel in many ways is very similar to the other with the radio button that we just looked at for the types of bagels. Except there's no coffee. All right. There's regular, there's decaf, and there's cappuccino. So the difference is when you have to buy a bagel, but you don't have to buy coffee. Again, in this example. Very similar to the stuff that you saw before. All right. So that creates that. Then we got to put it all together. So we got to take all these individual panels and do this with them. And we're not even worrying yet about the buttons on the bottom. So that's going to be in your north area. There's your center area. There's your west area. There's your east area. All right. So that's what we have right there once we put them together. And that's what they do here in the order calculator GUI. Notice what we're doing because this looks different. Can somebody tell me in English? Whoops, I want to go, come on, oh, you won't let me do that, that's nice. These 4 lines right here, what are we doing right there? What is that doing? Well, you're sort of in the right area, but we're creating 4 different panels by creating 4 different panel objects. One of the reasons that I believe the author did it like this and put things in different classes, much easier to move stuff around and change things around. Because really when you think about it, the stuff that's in here, these are 4 distinct things. This is just a heading. That is just bagel information. That is just topping information. That is just coffee information. You could have made the case and said, well, that's bagel and topping information. You could have put those in one class. And yes, you could have. This whole thing could have been put in one class. You could have you put it in one class and made it work. But by taking the stuff and separating it out, you're really starting to do more modularization and say, you know, a place for everything in its place type of an idea. All right. So we do that. Then we set a border layout. And what do? Well, then we've got to, you know, basically, as it says, create those custom panels. All right. And then add the stuff in the appropriate area. all right, including this button panel, which we do at the bottom, and we'll get to that in a minute. We need what? Our action listener for what? For our calculate button and our exit button. We don't need action listeners for the other stuff. That's going to be calling the methods from those classes. All right. So there's our calculate button, and what are we doing? Well, add the bagel cost plus the topping cost plus the coffee cost. I guess the cheapest one you could have, I think a plain bagel was $1.25. So if you walk in there and you get a plain bagel with no toppings and no coffee, it's going to be $1.25 plus 0 plus 0. All right, you add the tax to it, and boom, it works. No? No, I think those were check boxes. No, the bagels were the one that was selected. Toppings weren't selected. Also, we saw this on Tuesday. That's typically all you put in there for your exit button. System.exit 0. 0 means that it's a normal termination. And normally, if you've got other numbers, and usually they're negative numbers, that means there's something you've got to be concerned with. All right, we're just saying that when you're done, just basically finish. And there's our main. Again, not very big. Put it all together, and that's what we get. So they show an example. You come in there with a wheat bagel, plus cream cheese, plus butter, plus decaf. You add those four up, you get $3.50, and I can't even read that. It looks like 21 cents. So whatever the percentage is for tax, 7% or whatever it is, you add the two together, and that's your total. All right. And the last thing that this is the end. The last thing they talk about in this chapter, and again, you didn't have to do this, but they show you, if you want to, how you can add a splash screen to this. Okay, you know what a splash screen is, just what comes up when you first start running the program. All right, and it's in the book on pages 830 and 831, but again, my book doesn't map up with yours as far as page numbers. Mine's the 804. So it's a graphic image that displays when it loads up. What you want to show is something like this. You could have your logo or whatever you wanted to come up when you did it. Okay, and there's not much to it. But it says here to display the splash screen, you basically would run this from the command line. I don't know if you could do it from Eclipse or not. I've never tried. All right. But what's going to happen is for about 3 seconds, that's going to come up and show on the screen. And as soon as that leaves, then this comes up. Okay. And the very last thing, and actually I told this to a couple of you the other day about using the console for debugging. Remember that if you're using, so far, all we've done GUI-wise has been J-option panes and J-message dialogues. I'm not asking you that, I'm telling you that. That's all we've done. But if you run a program under Eclipse, and that's all you're using for your input and your output, you can still say system.out.println and still write something to the debug window. And that's often a really good way to do debugging. I'll have to try to remember next week that, I think the next chapter will go faster, because John said he's got a few things that he would say about debugging. I'm sure he's probably worked with it more than I have. So that's it. So on Tuesday of next week then, what we're going to do is we're going to go over the Joe's Automotive and build it using Eclipse, using the builder basically. All right. And then on Thursday of next week, we're going to go over Chapter 13, what's in here. Now look what's in there. All the stuff we didn't cover so far. In other words, read-only text fields, lists, combo boxes, all right, and menus, which are just a pain in the butt doing them this way. It's just because there's a lot of work to do. All right. So we'll talk about all that. And I already mentioned the swing and the AWT. I started talking about the hierarchy, so we'll get into that in more depth and breadth of coverage. So we'll do that on Thursday. Then you'll have at least a week of lab. All right, and after that, then we'll come back and we'll do chapter 14. You'll have another week of lab, and then we'll go into Android. All right, so that's all that I had. Questions?